Welcome everybody to our webinar. We're so excited that you joined us today. It is the day after Earth Day, and that means we're going to do a webinar today on the Earth, the environment, and emergency response. We're so excited that you came today. You're going to get lots of great information, and we want you to know that you can ask questions. We want you to interact with us. We want to answer the questions that might come up for you today. So please use your Twitter hashtag and the handle hashtag Earth and Emergencies. Earth and Emergencies is what you want to use today. And feel free to share information with your friends and ask them to join us as well. We're so excited to have three awesome panelists with us today. You're going to learn so much. You're going to have a great time. I want to let you know that World Hope is an organization that uses market-based, community-driven enterprise solutions to empower, protect, and build resiliency around the world. And those three areas are very important as we talk about the environment, the Earth, and how we respond with emergencies that happen around the globe. So today we're going to have our panelists share a little bit about that. But before we jump in, I want to welcome all three countries that are joining us today. We have people from Canada, the United States, and Australia who will be joining us. Some of you might be listening later as we've recorded this for future use, and we want you to know we're glad that you've joined us as well. We're going to have our guests and our panelists share a little bit about themselves, introduce who they are and why they're here, why you want to hear from them, and then we'll jump right into our panel time together. So, John Lyon, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thanks for having me. My name is John Lyon. I'm the president and CEO of World Hope International. World Hope, we focus on water, health, and protection issues, and we deliver those programming through market-based, community-based, and emergency response means. And so we've responded to disasters ever since our founding in 1996, and this is a great opportunity to share some of the best practices we've learned and insights we've learned along the way, alongside of our dear partners here, Airlink and Katadyn.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us. We're excited to hear from you. Liz, why don't you share a little bit about yourself?
Hi, thanks, Tanya. I'm Liz Bloomfield. I'm the Director of Humanitarian Programs at Airlink. We're a non-profit organization that connects non-profit organizations with the aviation sector in the transportation of humanitarian workers and supplies in the wake of an emergency. I've been with Airlink for about 18 months now, and it's a great team we have here. We work with about 40 different airlines and aviation actors and upwards of 80 different non-profit organizations. And what we're really trying to do is build a bridge across those two sectors. The aviation sector is often really keen to support emergency responses, but they don't always know the best way to do that to best effect. So by working through Airlink, which has expertise in the humanitarian sector, we can help identify where the priority humanitarian needs are. We can identify those non-profit organizations that are responding to those needs, and then we can leverage the capacity of the aviation sector to move people and supplies as quickly as possible in the wake of an emergency. So it's really about bringing those two sectors together, ultimately to serve communities in crises and ensure the maximum impact for those people that are really facing a really tough time.
Awesome. We're so glad you're here. Thanks so much for joining us.
Okay.
And John Wright, welcome. Introduce yourself, please. Oh, unmute yourself. All right, go ahead, John. Introduce yourself. Oh, we still can't hear you. There you go. Okay, go ahead.
Great, thanks.
You're good.
Yeah, John Wright with Katadyn. I work specifically with response and humanitarian development part of the world.
Oh, we're having trouble hearing John. All right, we'll keep going, come back for John once he gets his screen unfrozen. We're going to jump in now to our panel time and have our panelists share some really cool things about this topic, the earth, the environment, and emergency response. And I want you to know, if you have any questions or comments, please put that on Twitter. You can ask us questions there. We'd love to answer those for you. It's #EarthEndEmergencies, and we'd love to see you over there. John, are you back with us? John,
I can hear you okay, yes.
Okay, go ahead and
Can
introduce
you hear
yourself
me?
again. We can hear you now, yes.
Very good, thanks. Okay, yeah, John Wright with Katadyn. We're a manufacturer of water-related solutions for disaster response in the humanitarian world. We also build food solutions, stoves and cooking equipment, UV equipment. So we have quite a variety of solutions. Our partners utilize our breadth of technologies to solve specific problems. John has called me at times and said, "Hey, we have sulfur in the water. How do we fix that?" So we approach our partnerships as having a global understanding of water solutions and food solutions, and providing those solutions wherever they're needed globally.
Oh, that's awesome. We're so glad you're here. We can't wait to hear more about that. And we're going to jump right in, John, right with you. And I'd love to hear a little bit about emergency response plans. I don't normally think about the word sustainability when I think about emergency response, but considering it's Earth Day, how would you say that sustainability and emergency response goes together? And what do we need to think about when we think about those two things?
Well, I think we all kind of learned a lot from the experience in Puerto Rico, where they were left with literally 20,000 pallets of single-use water bottles. I think we all saw the images in the media, and I think we all started to question, what kind of footprint are we leaving behind as we approach these emergency response elements or even development programs. So, sustainability can apply in several ways. One of which is just the footprint that we just talked about, but the other would be, the lifetime of the filter solutions that we put in place, or the lifetime of food solutions, or if we need a filter that will do 1,000 liters, chances are that with a short-lived filter could leave a footprint behind, and we all need to be mindful of that. What kind of refuse are we leaving behind, especially in island communities, where that can become an incrementally bigger problem as they try to deal with. So the lifetime of a filter is one way to look at this. Filters can last anywhere from 150,000 liters down to about 1,000 liters. And so selecting a technology that's fitting in terms of the time of filtration that's needed for that environment, and then thinking on far down the stream of what will happen to that filter when it's reached its useful life. I think those are the questions that we're really getting to today.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. John Lyon, how does World Hope proactively assist our partners and people we work with in creating sustainable emergency plans around the world?
Well, one thing we do is we partnered with Katadyn on deploying specially made water desalination kits that can be deployed with the team to make water in an environment that's been hit with a disaster. What's great about these systems is that we can make water right on site. We aren't using single-use plastics, moving bottled water, and we actually use the water that's already in. We can deploy these systems in saltwater conditions and make water for people without using single-use plastics. I think also pre-planning on disasters is super critical. We partnered with Airlink. Airlink's done a great job of developing these regional plans in I can let Liz speak to that more specifically, but partner with our partners to have pre-plans in place about when something happens, who's going in, who's doing what. The more you can pre-plan, the better, the easier it is to actually respond on these disasters.
Oh, yeah, that's good. Liz, let's touch a little bit on that, the pre-planning and the logistics with people together. How does that work, and how does Airlink participate in that?
Sure. So this has been a really big initiative for Airlink over the past 12 months or so, where we're really trying to think about being prepared for emergency response. And these preparedness initiatives have taken a range of different, they comprise a range of different programs and projects. As John mentioned, we've compiled a series of regional response plans that essentially break the globe into 6 regions, broadly aligned with the continents. Because what we feel is that the nature of the response in different parts of the world is going to look quite different. And it's important that we're taking a targeted regional approach so that we're engaging the appropriate actors for that region. Certainly that's important from a sustainability point of view, because you don't necessarily want to be moving humanitarian supplies or people around the globe if actually it makes more sense and it's more responsible and sustainable to be sourcing those people and those supplies on a more regional or local level. So we're working really closely with our partners, both our non-profit partners and our aviation partners, on these regional plans, and they comprise a range of different initiatives, identifying the high-risk countries, really understanding the nature of threats to those countries, trying to think about the different plans, that what a response might look like in those different contexts, and doing a deep dive into and practicing and drilling and going through a response plan. We do a number of tabletop exercises where we work through a scenario and try to understand what the response might look like, as well as contingency planning and understanding how we would mobilize different resources. So that's a really key part of what we're doing on that side. But what we're also trying to do is bring our partners together to understand how to be better prepared for the logistics element of a response, which is sometimes forgotten. And yet it's a really important component of any humanitarian response. Often these are hard to reach places. They'll often be at a time where there may be constraints on the supply chain, and there may not necessarily be an abundance of options, commercial options, to be able to get people and supplies into the response area. So what we've done over the past few months is we've brought together partners for Latin America and the Caribbean. We brought together partners, around 15 partners in Mexico City back in February. And then we brought together partners for the Asia Pacific region in Singapore just last month. And I'm delighted that World Hope were able to join us for both of those events. And in those sessions, we not only go through some of the technical elements of a response, so that how we can all be better prepared to move equipment, key supplies, but also networking and understanding how we can all support one another. And one of the real learning points that came out of that event for me and for other partners was that we don't all, as organizations, need to be acting independently. Sometimes there's equipment, or there's expertise, or there's supplies that through good collaboration and partnership, we can more effectively, more efficiently respond in a collaborative way. And so those workshops, those have really been a key to building those relationships, building that capacity, and also involving partners at a much more regional and local level, rather than these being initiatives that are just happening in, say, the United States, Canada, Australia, or Europe, but actually really engaging partners that are operating in the region.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And that really ties in the sustainability aspect whenever you think about that ahead of time and you're careful about the impact that it has on the earth. John, Wright, I want to go back to you and talk a little bit more about the single-use plastics. Could you sit on that for a little bit longer and explain maybe how and why that's difficult for the environment and actually not helpful?
All try to understand is that if there is an absence of preparation, if we don't have devices for filtering water available, the next best solution is to put a pallet of water on an aircraft and fly it in. So what's involved with that is all of the fuel, all of the hours of personal time to manage that, all of the fuel that's used on the ground to deliver that water. And remember that in almost all cases, there is some kind of acceptable water nearby that could be used, processed, filtered, and then delivered as drinking water, as opposed to shipping in a pallet of water via air freight, which is tremendously expensive. One of the calculations that we've done is that flying in a pallet of water, not via ocean, but via an aircraft, has about the same cost as a flight-ready aquifer system has. except the aquifer will continue to deliver water every day. So, for example, a single pallet of water is about the same amount of water that one of our aquifer desal devices can produce in a single day. So you understand how having an aquifer or having the correct water solution for whatever the conditions are contributes to community resilience in a pretty major way. And it eliminates the costs associated with that. Now, to your point, the downstream effects, I mean, again, if you go back to Puerto Rico, 20,000 pallets of single-use containers, the water is no longer usable. And now, you know, they're going to have to either process that plastic on site, which comes at an energy expense, or they're going to have to landfill it on site, which of course has its own set of constraints, or ship it back to the US or some other place where it can be processed. All of these are, you know, tremendous expenses that really aren't absolutely necessary given the solutions that are available, not just from Katadyn, but from other folks as well. There are solutions that could address that water need very quickly and very energy efficiently without leaving a footprint. So for example, a desal system really doesn't require any chemicals except for perhaps an occasional cleansing. It can be very fuel efficient. So this is another way for us to look at the sustainability. That is that if it requires a 60 kilowatt generator and diesel fuel to operate it, that comes at a much higher expense and a much higher sustainability cost compared to a solar operated system. So, you know, the solutions that we're keen on, that John and I have worked together on, and Liz has flown some of these systems around the world, are, you know, solar operated systems that leave literally nothing behind, that can take any water, including seawater, and process it into drinking water.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. John Lyon, I want to ask you a little bit about being environmentally sound whenever reconstruction takes place in a community. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Sure, absolutely. So disasters are horrible for the environment. You know, they churn up a lot of debris removal. Many times, as John mentioned, our response can be to introduce a lot more single-use plastics to the environment, so the response can be environmentally damaging as well. But at the same time, disasters can create a great opportunity to build back better, right? Build back the environment in a way that the built environment in a way that's going to be more sustainable from an environmental impact position. I think we're seeing that to some extent in Puerto Rico, where you know, the energy system went down, and now we're, instead of just rebuilding back with carbon producing fossil fuel generation energy facilities, they're actually building back with a lot more solar and renewable energy in mind. So I think there's disasters can create opportunities to build back in a more environmentally sustainable way. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to also, I think the debris removal, you know, with these disasters can churn up a lot of debris removal. You know, local, state and local organizations, and internationally, governments need to give a lot of thought to what pre-planning on what happens when a disaster happens around the environment. And some of the things that need to take place is they need to do an assessment of what type of materials are on the ground. You know, are there toxic materials that could be impacted? They need to give some thought into what types of disasters could happen. You know, is it earthquake or hurricane or tsunami? What are these types of events, and how that could impact the materials that are on the ground? And then also think about who's going to be responsible for the removable of each of the items that could be taken down. So, you know, if it's your own home and the tree comes down, the homeowner is going to be responsible. If the homeowner can't get that down, who's going to be? Are there contractors that can take down the tree removal? If it's a state park, local state state natural resources department should be responsible for that. And everybody needs to have their plans on what's going to happen post-disaster to get cleaned up. And then where does all that waste go to? All that needs to be mapped out as well. In the US, the FEMA and the EPA have mapped a lot of these places out, and that's all publicly available on their websites. The internationally, that needs to happen as well. You know, where does this debris get removed to, and what can be done to recycle what's recyclable? What can be done to bury what can be just buried organically, and what can be left out of landfills.
Oh, absolutely. Those are good things to think about, and maybe something you don't think about whenever you think about emergency response and the earth and the environment. So that's really helpful to think about those specific areas. Liz, you just got back from Mozambique. I know that many of our organizations, all of our organizations, are responding to the cyclone that hit there. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that experience, and even specifically the importance of water and sanitation as it related to your experience there?
Absolutely. So yeah, as you mentioned, I just returned from Mozambique last week, where it was an honor to spend some time there with the World Hope team that have been doing some incredible work there, but also many of our other NGO partners who are also doing work on water and sanitation. And I think Mozambique is an excellent example of why very quickly standing up a response around water and sanitation can make a real difference in both in the response itself, but also ensuring that it doesn't become a much more serious human tragedy. In the case of Mozambique, there was a cholera outbreak, but because very quickly the response mobilized as it relates to water and sanitation, and people were given access to good water, reliable water sources, actually that cholera outbreak was contained, and certainly as it seems at the moment, the people are being treated, they're recovering. Yes, there continue to be new cases, but I think that it's through the swift response and the access to water and sanitation that people, you know, we've collectively as a humanitarian community and the government as well have been able to stop that from becoming a more tragic outcome. Now, I saw firsthand on a very personal level what difference that can make to people, as well as meeting up with the World Hope team. I also met with another partner, Global Medic, that are doing great work in this area. And I spent time at a maternity hospital in Beira City. And that was really a really humbling experience. These are women that are going through what should be a joyous time in their lives, and yet facing it in the most difficult of circumstances. And I think the work that was being done at that hospital to provide a sustainable water source was incredibly important, not only because it was helping to address the immediate challenges around ensuring clean and reliable access to water, but also the organization was working with, actually in this case, that the maintenance person for the hospital, training him in how to run and operate and maintain the water filter for that hospital, so that when that organization leaves, which they have now done, he can continue to maintain that water source. So much as both the Johns have been saying, it's that long-term nature of providing a reliable water source that's so critical here. And I think to do that, you have to be willing to invest in building the capacity of that community. Showing up with a lot of bottled water not only brings all kinds of other challenges, but it's a very short-term solution, and actually working with the community to build their skill set. And that's the approach we always will focus on with Airlink, is how can we support the most sustainable solution? We don't want to be a supply-driven organization. We don't want to just send a bunch of bottled water because someone happens to have donated it, but we want to understand what the humanitarian needs are on the ground, and how can we make best choices about the best choices about the response, send experts with the right equipment and the right expertise and knowledge that they can transfer to the local community and build that capacity, and also increase that preparedness and that resilience to be able to respond and to in the event of a further emergency. So all of those things are things we take into account as Airlink when we're deciding how best to respond and how best to support our partners. But in terms of the experience of being in Mozambique, it was a privilege and an honor to see firsthand just what a difference is being made by World Hope, Katadyn, and many other organizations for the people of Mozambique.
Oh, that's great. I love how you're sharing how it's a team effort, right? Everyone is involved, everyone brings their expertise to the table, and around those solutions is when a difference takes place. It's really, really neat to hear that. Just a follow up to that, Liz, kind of over the long term, over the past few years and your experiences, what have you learned as it relates to civil societies and emergencies and how those go together?
Yeah, I mean, great question, because I think it's such an important issue for us all to be thinking about all the time. There's certainly no decline in the level of humanitarian needs around the globe. We're continuing to see both natural disasters and other more complex emergencies generating huge humanitarian need, and the resource pool is not sufficient to meet all of those needs. And so we really need to be thinking about how we're engaging different sources of expertise. And that includes civil society, volunteer organizations, nonprofit organizations, many of the partners that Airlink works with, but also about how we're engaging the private sector. And our experience at Airlink is actually just how willing many of those private sector organizations, in our case within the aviation sector, are to be supportive. What they're very honest about is they don't necessarily have the expertise to know how best to leverage their resources in the event of a disaster, and they don't necessarily have the capacity to be able to do that. And I think that's where organizations like Airlink bring something quite unique, because we can act as that bridge. We can because we are very well connected with the humanitarian system, we understand what the needs are on the ground. We're working really closely both with governments, with partners, with other stakeholders, to really have a good sense of what the humanitarian needs are. We can then work with our partners, we can work with the aviation sector, essentially to link all of those pieces together so that the aviation sector can leverage what their support in a way that best meets needs. Now, let's be honest, we should acknowledge that the aviation sector itself and the environment don't necessarily, there's some conflict there in terms of what the impact of the aviation sector on the environment. But I think it's really important that we understand that there's an important role that the aviation sector can play in responding quickly in an emergency. But also there's a huge amount of opportunity that Airlink can help to tap into, ensuring that we're making best use of the available resources. So flights that might otherwise be running empty. Of course, it makes great sense, both in terms of resource mobilization and the environment, to be filling those flights with humanitarian supplies. And we have a great example following the Ecuador earthquake back in 2016, which happened around Mother's Day, so around this kind of time of year, and flowers were being flown from Ecuador back to the US, and they were going back empty. And through our partnership with a number of different airlines, we were able to ensure those flights did not go back empty, but they went back with humanitarian supplies that were very much needed. Now, those were flights that would have been going regardless. So what a great way to make use of capacity for the benefit of communities that are facing a really difficult time. So we have loads of examples like that, and I think what we're at Airlink are trying to do is use that capacity when it might be that we're pre-positioning supplies in high-risk countries, and we're making use of little bits and pieces of empty capacities that the airline might have. Through our connections, through our relationships with the aviation sector, we can ensure that we're making best use of that, and then as and when a disaster does occur, those are supplies that are well positioned to be able to respond.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's helpful. As I'm hearing you talk a little bit about preparing and getting on site quickly, because that's the need, right? When an emergency happens, you need to get there quickly. I'm kind of sensing a bit of a tension here, that there's a desire to get there quickly, but then also a desire to do it correctly or to do it right as it relates to the impact of the environment and serving those who are affected. How do you guys see that tension playing out in real life as you've been watching emergencies take place and the responses to those emergencies?
Well, I think a really important thing for us is, first of all, understanding the situation. So any kind of humanitarian response, we must ensure that this response is being tailored to what the needs are on the ground, and they're not always going to be the same. Sometimes there will be a high need for shelter, sometimes there will be more of an emphasis on medical or food. often there will be a high emphasis placed on wash. It really depends, but I think it's important that we take the time and we invest effort into understanding what the needs are on the ground, and then we build back from there. So we're not having a response that's just being driven by what people want to send. And we're very clear, Airlink, about the role that we play in helping to shepherd that and to helping to oversee that situation, so that, going back to the example John gave earlier of a huge amount of resources being left in Puerto Rico, those are not situations that we want to be contributing to, because that doesn't help the people who are already going through a difficult time. It clogs the supply chain. It can have a detrimental impact on the overall response, and we see that in other contexts too, where unsolicited donations, so communities in the very best of intent have collections of goods, and then those kind of mixed cargo of goods are sent to a disaster situation, and because there isn't necessarily somebody on the other end who can distribute those, or it's not clear what the items are, they can often just be left in a storage warehouse. They can cause all kinds of blockages, and they're not necessarily helping the people who are in need. And so what we at Airlink are trying to do is work with our vetted partners who we already have a strong relationship with. We understand the programming that they're going to be doing on the ground, so that we can all feel confident that when we're responding in an emergency, when it's stressful, when there's lots of different things going on, that we already have a good understanding of who is doing what and how they will be responding, and we're not contributing to the problem. We are helping to address it.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. That's helpful. John Wright, how would you see that playing out, that tension in wanting to get there quickly, but also want to do it correctly?
One of the challenges that we have is understanding the water conditions at the destination. And I think the reality is that we have a rough idea of where we'll be, but we don't know exactly where we'll be. And we certainly don't know the water conditions at that point. And, one thing that we need to be thinking about is implementing solutions, storing solutions, having these solutions ready that can deal with the gamut of water conditions. So that's one of the things that is possible with several of the technologies available to us now. Reverse osmosis is one of them. Reverse osmosis, and specifically seawater reverse osmosis, works in really all water conditions. So, we know that about 2% of the water on the planet, surface water, is, fresh water that's accessible. 2% is completely locked up and inaccessible, and 96% of it is salt water. That 96% salt water serves for emergency purposes as a solution for situations that otherwise, water just would be inaccessible. But the same, reverse osmosis, seawater reverse osmosis solution will work in fresh water. And it'll work in situations where there's contaminants, and it'll work in situations where there's a biological threat, viral content, bacterial content, and protozoan cyst content. The reverse osmosis solutions will remove all of those, including demineralizing the water and removing the salt. So that's a very broad, very, universal solution to just about any water condition that removes a lot of those constraints.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's amazing to think about this stuff from a different angle, and you guys are bringing that angle to the table here, which is just really helpful for our audience to hear. John Lyon, how would you answer that question, the challenge and that tension between getting there quickly and then also doing it correctly?
It's a great question. I think when you look at all the different types of humanitarian needs, food, housing, water, healthcare, there's sort of clocks, I think, on each of these that are ticking. And almost always water is the number one need. So that should be the first thing out of the gate. Everybody's thinking about how do we get these things sorted. Health and housing are are important as well as food. But to Liz's point, we gotta really know the situation detailed before we move. But moving quickly and confidently and smartly is important.
Yeah, for sure. And follow up with you, John Lyon, on that. So let's say I'm a church pastor, I'm a congregation member, maybe I'm a leader in my community or an organization. How can I start to get involved in this? What can I think about? What can I start to do? How can I start to prepare to be a part of the solution that doesn't hurt the environment when responding to emergencies, but actually help in the process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think all community actors, from the individual down to faith-based groups to local community groups, all have a unique role to play. One thing I love about the responses to disasters is that when faced with a disaster, we all have sort of this common existential threat, and we all sort of come together to resolve the problem. And I love seeing it. It happens after every single disaster I've worked in. People are not racially divided. They're not divided by faith. They're not divided by politics. They're coming together to work together. So that is just one thing that kind of draws me to this sort of space. But specifically to your point, everybody has a role to play, and everybody should be thinking about a disaster, because we all live in some sort of disaster zone for one type of element or another. And so I think linking up with first responders, linking up with your county or your local community that's planning for disasters, knowing what to do in case of an event, knowing the warning signs, right? So most places have early warning systems. So knowing what the sign is the event a duck and cover type of event, or is it an event to get to high ground type of event? Is it an event that you should seek some sort of shelter? Knowing the early warning system. So that can literally save lives, just being prepared at that level.
So as a community member, what role should I take as it relates to responding to emergencies, whether it's in my community or globally, John Lyon?
Well, I think participating in events that help raise awareness about these types of things. Most communities, a lot of communities will have sort of drills and tests and early warning tests, and participating in those types of events will really help with that. Train, and not just train, but train, then learn what should have happened and what you didn't know what happened, and iterate into the next training until you get it perfect. And then when the real thing happens, everybody will be working off of muscle memory just to get it done.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. John Wright, I want to come back a little bit to the water solutions that you mentioned, and just kind of ask for our audience if you could dig in a little bit more on the reverse osmosis, the desalination, maybe explain a little bit more about that, and then how you've seen the global response to those specific solutions. Are you seeing people say, yes, we want those solutions whenever an emergency takes place, or does it take time to get those in place in a country when an emergency happens?
Ready to go is a constraint. It's a constraint in any corporate American setting and any government setting. That is at once the thing that is the solution, the inventory of reverse osmosis devices or other freshwater solutions is the solution. On the other hand, it's the one thing that we don't really have a lot of in this country, and it contributes to community resilience, I think, in a very, very positive way. With regard to desalination, the process is very similar to filtration as we all know it. There's a membrane, and that membrane has very, very small pores, and those pores are small enough that turbidity and biological load and even mineral content cannot pass through it. Really, all that can pass through that membrane is the water molecule itself, resulting in a very, very pure water. Now, standard reverse osmosis, as we all know it today, I mean, the typical solutions tend to be very, very high pressure solutions, well over 1,000 pounds, and require a lot of energy to do that. Diesel generators is typical, 4 to 5 kilowatt, per liter is typical. And the technologies that are available today can do the same task with about 2 to 3 kilowatts per liter. So, at once we're providing a universal solution, but those solutions that require less energy have an even greater impact on reducing the impact on the environment and the power demand that goes with it. So, for example, the units that John deploys around the world have a built-in solar panel. It's 3 poster-sized solar panels that produce about 400 watts of energy. And that's all that it takes to produce about 360 gallons a day of water from seawater or fresh water or highly turbid water, contaminated water. All of those are adequate sources. So, desalination, as we all know, it tends to be very energy efficient. One of the messages that we should all take away today is that there are options that utilize energy recovery and reduce the amount of energy that's needed to operate them and make them very portable devices. So, for example, again, the units that John deploys can be carried as luggage. Very, very portable systems. They're FAA compliant and they work, as a luggage. And I've experienced this myself, having flown them into disaster scenarios as luggage. So there's some solutions that are really quite viable. And again, past year was one where we used the intercoastal waterway as a water source. And at times that's fresh water. And at times it's brackish, and at other times it's salt water. So deploying any one solution in that particular scenario is really, quite hard unless you have a reverse osmosis, seawater reverse osmosis solution. So I think some of the various technological advances are really going to work for the community to make water available. But to your point again, having a inventory of that product available to deploy is a real constraint. And it's one that we struggle with every day. And we're looking for solutions to build that inventory, maintain it, and have it ready to go whenever the disaster strikes.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Thank you for sharing that. That's really helpful. And one more question for you, Liz, before we jump into our Q&A with our audience. And again, if you have any questions that you have today you want to ask us, we want you to do that. Hashtag Earth End Emergencies is what you want to use on Twitter to be able to ask those questions. But before we jump into Q&A time, Liz, can you talk a little bit about the corporate partnership side of things? And if maybe there's a corporate person on the line here or listening, or an organization or a company who wants to actually participate and partner, what are some first steps they can take to be able to say, I want to be in this game, I want to help out with this?
Sure. I mean, there's so many different levels. And I think that, what our partnerships that we have with different airline actors and aviation actors really varies. So in many cases, it will be actually financial contributions. And of course, this is the real world. Money is what makes the world go round. And actually, sometimes it's those financial resources that really enable us to be able to run Airlink, run our operation, and be able to provide support to organizations like World Hope and others. It will also often be gifts in kind, so the donation of the services that they provide, whether that's a service or some kind of item, much like Katadyn. And so, it's about really using the resources that they already have to leverage in a way that really is very helpful in an emergency. But also, it might be about expertise. And so, as well as donating financial resources and gifts in kind, we'll also work very closely with the airlines that have a wealth of information and understanding and expertise, technical knowledge around logistics as it relates to aviation and more broadly. And we can leverage that in the case of an emergency. So we certainly saw during the response to the hurricanes in the Caribbean in late 2017, that actually the airlines were also having to respond to their own emergency because of the impact of the hurricanes. But they had so much important technical information that we were able to consolidate and use to help the NGOs inform their decision making, that I think it's important to think about these private sector actors beyond just money or resources, that actually they have really valuable expertise. And one of the things we've set up here at Airlink is an ambassadors program, where those actors within the airlines and other aviation organizations can actually be part of our community, and they can engage in all kinds of different activities where we can really take advantage of the expertise that they have. And that gives us surge capacity when there's an emergency. It gives us access to technical knowledge we wouldn't otherwise be able to do, to access. And so I think that's a really important component of it as well. And so, you know, I think all private sector organizations will have all different kinds of motivations. You're probably well aware of the term corporate social responsibility, and that means different things to different organizations. Some of it is really grounded in business reasons, about being well connected with their customer base. For others, it's about being really closely aligned with and ensuring that their staff and their own organization feels confident that they're working for a responsible organization that is giving back, is contributing. All kinds of different motivations. But I think it's important that we look beyond just the private sector being a source of money, but actually how we can engage them in the planning, how we can involve them early and not wait until a disaster has occurred, but make them a really integral stakeholder in the whole emergency response process, right from the preparedness phase through the response phase into recovery. Because as John, Hope and everyone will understand, these responses don't just end after a couple of weeks. In some cases, we're continuing to support these communities for many years, sometimes into the recovery phase. And the private sector has a really important part to play in being able to sustain that support to communities as they build themselves back, hopefully better.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Thank you for sharing that. That's really helpful, I think, for our corporate partners to understand that and know they can be involved in a very tangible way that's making a difference around the world. We're going to move to our Q&A time now, and if you have any questions, feel free to post those on Twitter with hashtag #EarthEndEmergencies. That's our event hashtag for this webinar. We'd love to hear from you. John Wright, the first question we have is for you. We have one of our participants who joined the freshwater productions team training last year with you to learn how to use a desalination unit and take it to a place whenever there's a disaster. I know that we had people trained, volunteers in the US and in Canada, and they're just wondering if you have a short refresher video from Katadyn on how to use that unit for if they were to go again, and maybe just kind of get a refresher on how to make that happen if they were to be deployed.
You know, as a refresher for me, we just deployed it, and we deployed it so quickly that we didn't have time to go through a training with the operators. Now, one thing that's unique to our systems, and there are some other systems too that can perform similarly, but you know, there are no settings. There is no adjustment of pressure. There is no adjustment if it turns from salt water to fresh water. So we remove a lot of the complexities. We've done that through our engineering to make it easy to operate. And we've also installed in the devices themselves, whatever size, kind of a visual illustrated guide to operating the system. And I found that in itself is a very, very good, and I can send that as a PDF. We also have the owner's manual, which is fairly long, but we offer that. And then we have a short video that goes through the setup, very short video that's on YouTube. So we have lots of resources, but the key element here is that we have removed so many of the complexities that require a lot of training, and made it very, very simple for anyone to operate, even if it's just someone on a phone kind of guiding them through it.
Okay, that's helpful.
We can provide those afterwards. I'll get you the links and the copies.
Okay, great.
And we can distribute.
Great. Oh, that's great. Yes, we'll provide that to our guest attender here. Great. That's awesome. The next question comes to John Lyon. I'm a church, but I'd like to know how to be involved in being a part of sustainable development with emergencies at a global level. What can I do on a global level, not just in my local community?
Great question. And yeah, everybody can play a part. I think it always depends on the type of disaster that's there. We've been fortunate to have partners like Airlink and Katadyn. So for the last few disasters, we've been able to get water filtration systems into hard to reach places as a result of our logistics partner with Airlink. So for instance, in Mozambique, we were able to find a team of 6 people who were most of who were already pre-trained on water relief efforts, and be able to access Beira, Mozambique, with the water filters that Katadyn had. We also have a great partner in Amazon.com who helped us finance those water filters. So there's individual ways that local churches and organizations can participate in international disasters. I think of a great example too. During the Ebola outbreak, we had a local our local office in Sierra Leone was really struggling with how to get ready for that. We couldn't find the local resources and people who had the technical training to manage an Ebola fight of Ebola, from a medical perspective. So we had a partner up in Minnesota who attended a woman who attended a church and volunteered. She literally got on the next plane to Sierra Leone and helped us stand up 15 community care centers in partnership with UNICEF, which after in a post-operation research report that was conducted by the London School of Tropical Hygiene and Medicine found that 50,000 lives were saved as a result of those community care centers. So I think there's all kinds of opportunities. We got to think opportunistically about each disaster and how we can support. But I think in advance, just getting to know who's on the scene. So get on our mailing list, get on Airlink's mailing list, get on Katadyn's mailing list. Know when opportunities happen, when trainings are available, and network in advance of these things, and let us know what your skills are. If you have a specific skill, we'll file it away, and when something comes up, we can jump at it. Disasters are happening constantly, so there's constantly a need for certain types of skill sets that we can deploy.
Perfect. Great. All right. The next question is for John Wright. How did Katadyn move towards helping with sustainable development as a for-profit company? What did that path look like for Katadyn specifically?
Yeah. Well, I think it's similar to a lot of corporations in similar situations. The technologies that we offer represent solutions for people in need, and I think that's where we felt that the disaster community, the disaster response community, and the humanitarian development community would be a great fit with the solutions that we can provide in terms of providing water for people in need. So I think it comes back to just that, to implementing solutions where there were none previously is certainly one of them. Using our solutions that require less energy to create lower impact on the environment and to reduce single use. This is another motivation for us at Katadyn. Ultimately, we are an engineering kind of company. We make products, and we find it really to integrate those products and those capabilities into humanitarian efforts. So certainly there is a profit motive. There's no question about that. But once you've built a solution, not implementing that solution, it just isn't an option for us anymore.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Thank you. The next question here is for Liz. How are you utilizing or interacting with the Sustainable Development Goals in planning, response, and recovery? It's a big question, but how would you tackle that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question, and we're certainly very mindful of those Sustainable Development Goals, something that we have on our mind. I guess for us, it's about balancing the need for speed in a humanitarian response, in meeting the needs of people, often in very inaccessible areas, with the environmental impact. So as I touched on before, I think we're constantly working with our aviation partners to think about how we can utilize the aviation industry in the most responsible way. So, like I mentioned earlier, I don't think you're never going to overcome that tension entirely. But I think the very nature of disasters are such that the urgency with which the response is required, coupled with the difficult and hard to reach nature of those locations, often means that aviation is certainly in the immediate aftermath of a disaster is the only viable solution. So yeah, I think something we're very mindful of those goals. We're constantly thinking about how we can be a responsible actor and how we're working with our aviation partners in the same way to do that. But I think at the end of the day, it's about balance, and I think it's about using aviation at the right time. So in situations where it makes more sense for the cargo to be sent by boat, then that's what we'll recommend. If it makes sense to be sent by truck, then that's what we'll recommend. We're not about utilizing aviation at any cost. But I think one of the things that we hope at Airlink we can contribute is our ability to bring economies of scale and bring actors together and consolidate those movements. So rather than, let's say 10 different nonprofit organizations sending small to medium-sized shipments independently, by working through Airlink, we can consolidate those, and we can, through collaboration, both eliminate duplication. So if we've got partners that are sending similar kind of equipment that forms part of their response, and there's opportunities for them to share, we can help facilitate that so that we're not sending things that don't need to go. But also we can bring economies of scale so that all of those shipments aren't being made independently. I think those are all ways in which we can actively contribute to those Sustainable Development Goals. So it's something that we're constantly mindful of.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And the last question here is for you, Liz. Do you see general aviation playing a role in immediate response? Do you think there is a need for organization and availability in this area?
Well, yes, absolutely. And I think as Airlink thinks about its own long-term strategic plans and how it can maximize its contribution in this space, these are all questions that we're looking at constantly. So I think I think certainly what I saw from being on the ground in Mozambique, that it's really important to be on the ground and understand what the needs are. And so I think that's an important element of how Airlink will grow is being able to be connected to the ground. There's only so much you can do from a headquarters location, but actually being much closer to the action. So I think as we work forwards in terms of our own strategic planning, really trying to understand how to coordinate all of those different assets in a way that best meets the needs on for people on the ground is certainly something we're continuing to work on, how we can grow our own capacity as well as grow the capacity of our partners to increase the impact in that space. So, nothing's off limits for us, really. We're constantly trying to understand different ways in which we can leverage aviation. And so as we move forward, those are all things that we'll be exploring with our partners.
Oh, that's great. That's great, Liz. And I'm going to take those as your closing remarks. That's a great way for you to finish up there and very, very helpful. John Wright, any closing remarks for you as we finish up here in a couple minutes?
I just want to say again that, what we have between the three of us here is a fabulous partnership that has tremendous capacity to improve community resilience. And so just a moment of thankfulness to have John and Liz as my partners. We appreciate you both very much.
Great. That's awesome, John. John Lyon, any closing remarks for you?
I just echo Liz and John Wright. I think partnerships are like I said before, the only way we can beat a disaster, beat this common existential threat, is by people coming together, all different organizations, all different people, and pre-planning as much as we can, and then when the time strikes, everybody come together to work toward this common goal.
That's awesome. Liz, any closing remarks for you before we finish up?
No, the same thing. It's about working with a partnership and being prepared, not waiting for a disaster to happen, but really trying to anticipate what those challenges are going to be, being prepared for it, and ensuring that we're getting the right items, the right expertise and equipment to the right places to meet the identified humanitarian needs in time, because as we saw in Mozambique, it was the timeliness of the response that has helped to ensure it hasn't been a greater human tragedy than it was.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, thank you all for joining us. It was so wonderful to hear from you, to hear from your expertise. Thank you for watching us and joining us from the webinar, to all our guests. And if you are listening to a recorded version, we're so thankful that you were with us as well. If you have follow-up questions that maybe haven't been answered, please continue to put those on our Twitter, Earth and Emergencies, and we'll try to get those answers up to you as they come in. And again, just want to thank you so much for being here. Earth, the environment, and emergency response, all three of those things work together. It's very important, as we heard today, that we need to be aware of those things and consider that. And I hope that's made a difference for you and your community today as you've heard this, and maybe make an application in your personal life. So John Lyon, John Wright, Liz Bloomfield, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate it. And you guys all have a wonderful day.
Thanks.